thankful for the way these stories hold on to the lifetime we won't get back. I know these rivers carry on. People tend to stick to you after time. Places tend to do the same as we do. This river carries on and on.
Hello and welcome to Kankakee Podcast, where we talk about the people and places of Kankakee County. I'm Jake LaMore, and it feels good to be back after we took last week off. Of course, you might not even be listening to this episode in the time it's released, but regardless, it feels great to be back. And we're welcoming someone who's already been on the podcast, I believe, twice now. But that's because he's from the Kankakee County Museum, and I'm excited to welcome him back today. Except this episode is outside of the museum. We're going to actually focus on him today, and not a particular. I'm sure we'll dive into many historical subjects about Kankakee County, but I am pleased to welcome local historian Jack Klasey onto the podcast. How are you, Jack?
Oh, thank you, Jake. I'm happy to be here.
Of course. It's great to have you back, and I believe it was twice that you've been on.
Yes,
now,
it was.
Right?
That's right.
It was the Frank Lloyd Wright House and
the Radicke Brewery.
Radicke, yeah. I always think it's three because we had to re-record that Bradley House episode because of the little
glitch.
Yeah, the fiasco I had. But just the 3 times or 3 or 4 times that you and I have been able to talk in person, face to face, I've just been wanting to just know more about you and your life, because it sounds like you've lived an interesting life. I think one of the stories that looped me in was you were talking about your grandfather that used to work at, was it the Joliet County? Or not the Joliet, it was the Joliet prison.
That's right. My grandfather was his title was Chief Dietitian of the state of Illinois. And this was back in the 1950s, early 50s, actually even the late 40s. He was in charge of the kitchens in all of the state prisons in Illinois.
Oh, all of them? I thought
Yes.
it was just Joliet.
No, one of the perks of the job was that lodging was free. They were actually in the administration building of the old prison at Joliet on Collins Street. Most younger people would recognize that as the Blues Brothers prison.
Yep. That's how I've always recognized it, too.
The second floor of the administration building, which was part of the front wall of the prison, and then, of course, it was fenced off and so forth, were 2 apartments. One was my grandfather and grandmother's apartment, and the other was the person who was at that time the assistant warden of the prison, Joseph Reagan, who later went on for many years to be the supervisor of the chief warden of the prisons. But when we were little kids, we occasionally would be at church on Sunday morning, and after church, we'd gather outside talking to people, as we usually do. And one of us would probably mention that, we're going off to visit Grandpa in prison today, which, mortally embarrassed my parents. Totally got used to it, and everybody kind of knew that anyway. But
for even just the one person that didn't know, you would get that look.
That's
get that reaction like, what? Your grandfather's in prison? What? Why? What's he doing there?
He was an interesting man. He was a fairly short, tough little banty Irishman named Bill Sullivan.
Okay.
And he had a nickname in the prison, among the prison population. He was called Meatball Sully. And the way that came about is that whenever anybody would ask, what's for dinner tonight, Sully? Meatballs.
It was always meatballs, huh?
He was also the first author in the family.
Oh, okay. So it started with him. It didn't start with you.
He wrote a cookbook.
Oh, well, there you go.
It was a cookbook for state prison kitchens, and the recipes, for example, for mashed potatoes started with peel a bushel of potatoes and so forth. So It was not very useful, although it was often the gag gift given to new brides in the family for years.
That would be hilarious, and I'm sure. What was the title of it? What did it have? The word like prison in it, or correctional?
I don't remember
facility?
the title. Only the stories about the how it was used. He was an interesting man. He had been a florist, owned a chain of florist shops at one time. He was a teamster in the stockyards in Chicago when teamsters drove horses. And after he retired from the prison system, he and my grandmother were caretakers, operators of a funeral home at the north side of Chicago. So, very interesting man.
Wow, a lot of interesting jobs and careers right there.
Sort of runs in the family.
Yeah, I was going to say, just like you, you're not only attached to the Kankakee County Museum and the Historical Society, but you also write a weekly column in the Daily Journal that people can read every single weekend. I've been enjoying those for the last few years. I think is probably when I got turned on to them. And there's always something fascinating that you present to us every single week. So I think people could know you for either of those things, or even your books that you write. You've written several books at this point. And we'll get into your latest book here in a little bit. But where were you born? Were you born in Kankakee County?
No, I was born in Chicago.
Okay.
Grew up on the south side, out in actually the southeast side, out around the steel mills and so forth. And, let's see, went to Marquette University, major in journalism when I started out. At that time, it was possible, because the tuition rates were much lower, to work your way through school. Unfortunately, I only lasted about 2 years. I ran out of money. I was working full-time nights for Wonder Bread in the bakery and taking classes in the daytime. But by the end of my sophomore year, for some reason, I just couldn't accumulate enough money for the next year. So I said, okay, I'll take some time out. Well, unfortunately, it lasted about 40 years.
Did you ever go back and finish?
I did. I went back to Governor State University and finished my degree in... I can't remember, in the 80s sometime, I've forgotten.
Okay. But when did you originally go? Would that have been in the 60s, maybe?
Yeah, actually, 57 is when I started. That's right, it was 57, and I finished, and I went to finish my degree at Governor State in 87. So,
okay.
97. What triggered me there is a gift I got from some of my fellow editors where I was working at the time that I graduated. And it was a big brass paperweight star, and on it was engraved, "College, the best 40 years of your life."
Well, really, I mean, considering all of your experiences, you have probably a multitude of degrees, or you could even be labeled as a doctor at this point, just because education obviously goes beyond the classroom, and so you pretty much took it upon yourself to go to that classroom outside of a brick and mortar college,
A little bit of everything.
Yeah, a little bit of everything.
Actually, the experience situation is part of my degree. Governor State at the time that I started there, and I think they still have a version of this, had a specialized program for people coming back to complete a degree where with considerable research and presentation, you could apply for credit for different types of classes that you had equivalent experience for. So what you would do is identify a class, let's say Business Writing 101 or something of this sort. And by gathering examples and information and so forth on how you would have met the requirements of that class, you could be awarded the credit for that class. As it happened, I think I had 20 hours worth of credit
Wow.
from my applications. The notebook that I compiled with all of the background and so forth was a 2-inch thick notebook.
Yeah, so you were able to cash in, so
I was.
to speak. Yeah.
Yeah, and the reason I went back, my wife and a good friend, Dick Fry, who was an administrator out at Kankakee Community College, urged me to go back to school and finish my degree. And I said, well, I've never really had any problem with, somebody saying, oh, you can't have this job because you don't have a degree.
Yeah.
But they said, just for your own satisfaction, try it. So I went back, I took one class, and I was hooked. I loved it. So I would go every, couple evenings a week. I would go over I was working up in Tinley Park at the time, so Governor State was very handy.
Yeah.
And took a nice variety of classes. You got kind of a chance to build your own major or whatever. And actually I had graduated with a Bachelor of Arts without major, which is what was normally with that case, but you had a concentration. I concentrated in photography.
Oh, okay.
Rather than a writing field, which was kind of strange, but I got kind of hooked on photography. And I actually authored, and it's still in use, a textbook on photography that's used quite a few different high schools and community colleges in the country, and every high school in the state of Texas that has a photography class uses that textbook. And it's just about to start its 4th edition, which I retired from. I did the first 3 editions. It came out in 2002, and last one, I believe, was 2018. So I told the publisher this last time, I said, I don't really have enough energy left to do an intensive reboot, so let's find a co-author for me to take care of it.
Okay.
So
what's it called?
It's called Photography Portfolio to Profession, and it's a good-sized book. The commercial photography portion of it was helped greatly by Bill Jurevich, BJ.
Oh, he's a
with
great
his studio here.
Image Group, right?
Image Group, correct? Yeah. And BJ's an old friend. We've known each other for many, many years. And when they wanted to add, when we did the last revision of it for the Texas adoption, they wanted to add more on commercial photography and so forth, as opposed to just, photography as general principles. So I sat down with BJ, and he's, oh, yeah, help you out with it. And he provided photographs and a lot of information and so forth. So, and of course, he's got a lot of experience as an educator as well, because he's taught at Olivet for
I was going to say, is he still there?
I don't know if he is currently, but he was there for many years teaching. I think he is, though, because frequently he'll bring his students over to the column garden at the museum to do outdoor photography. And so I see him out there once in a while and catch up with what's going on.
Yeah. I haven't seen BJ in so long. He's taken pictures of me one time. I was attempting to get into acting. I was taking acting classes in the city, and I was like, well, I need some good pictures of myself.
Your 8x10s, yeah.
Yeah, so I hit up BJ, and he did a great job. But I also knew him from Weber Printing.
Oh, yes.
Working there, he would get envelopes printed and things like that.
Your grandfather's place.
Yeah, so I would.
Whom I also knew.
Yeah, right. Franklin as well. But so once in a while I would deliver his envelopes to Image Group Photography.
Right.
But I remember the one time he did take pictures of me. He was telling me about he was teaching at Olivet. And does he use your book for his classes?
No, I don't think he uses a textbook. Some photography instructors don't use a textbook. They use a variety of smaller, types of material.
Sure.
Kind of tutored to their class.
Yeah. And I assume your photography book, is it just kind of like the basics, or what is it? Or does it focus on, you said something about commercial?
Yeah, no, it actually takes in the entire spectrum of photography, all of the basics of, the mechanics of photography and composition, lighting, and so forth, studio work, commercial printing, commercial photography, outdoor photography. We even still have, and I think this next edition is going to drop it because almost nobody's doing it anymore. We still had darkroom.
Oh, okay.
And film photography.
Yeah.
But of course now everything is digital, and a lot of what's being added is relating to using their phone.
Yeah, and there are still some, I know. There There was one of my high school classmates. She went through a phase, and I don't know if it was when she was in school or if it was just something that she wanted to learn or that she was interested in. But there was a time where she was doing a lot of darkroom work, developing her own film and things like that. My grandfather, back to Franklin, he used to do that. He used to, because obviously he had a dark room for printing.
That's right.
Developing his
film negatives for various things. Yeah.
Yeah, so he would do that with his photographs as well, because he liked photography.
There are still a few places that are teaching darkroom work and so forth. We were at a wedding a couple of weeks ago, and my nephew, who actually lives out in New Jersey and works in New York, his 15-year-old son was there, and we got talking, and he said he was taking a photography class and found out that, yes, they were shooting film and actually doing darkroom work.
That's so cool. I think it's something that should always be taught, whether it's just a very small chapter or what, lesson. I think it's just cool to learn the history of the art of photography,
That kind of fits into my whole approach to things. I'm a technical person, although I don't have a formal technical background. But I always like to know how something is done, and I also like to write about how things are done.
You're a man of all media, is what you are. I would say that's a good way to instead of a jack of all trades, you're a jack of all media.
Well, thank you. That's very nice.
Because I remember the first time we sat down, we recorded that Bradley House episode. You started talking about how you used to work at a recording studio in downtown Kankakee years ago.
We came to Kankakee in '63. I was working for the Journal for about 4 years. And I'd always been kind of interested in audio work and so forth. In fact, technically, my major when I was at Marquette was broadcast journalism. So I was always kind of interested in studio things. And I saw a sign on a storefront in West Court Street saying something or other, about a recording studio. I thought, oh, that's interesting. So I popped in and got talking to a fellow who ran it, a fellow named Spencer Barnard, who was an educator. And it turned out it was a company called Imperial International Learning, that was the time when the audio cassette had just been introduced. And they jumped on that idea and thought this would be a great medium for education. So they began producing lessons and educational materials on audio cassette. And they were just getting started at that time. And we got talking, and I was doing a little freelance work for them, a little bit of recording, and a little bit of, this and that. And went to work for them. I quit the Journal and went to work for them. And eventually we ended up, a number of years, doing quite a few different things. History. We had one historical thing that was really cool. It was called The Living History Book. And to be honest, it was a ripoff of Walter Cronkite's You Are There.
Oh, okay.
Which was the same sort. They're dramatized events in history, in this case taken from the viewpoint of a radio broadcast, radio coverage of an event or whatever. So we got different writers to do different things. We had Columbus's discovery of America, the Battle of Gettysburg, et cetera, and so forth. I wrote the Kennedy assassination script for that.
Oh, wow.
Because that was well, for one thing, because believe it or not, I was the first person in Kankakee to know about the assassination.
Because you were working for the Journal at the time?
I was working for the Journal, and on that day, I was the youngest newest reporter in the newsroom. So at lunchtime, everybody would clear out and head out for lunch, but somebody had to babysit,
the phone,
be on duty.
Yeah.
And so I was the one left on duty, and everybody else was up at Jensen's Restaurant, which was half a block up from the Journal on Dearborn.
Okay.
We, of course, got our national and international news by teletype from United Press International and Associated Press and so forth. And they had a bell code. the various numbers of bells dinging meant something was urgent or, breaking news of one sort or other.
So it's kind of like similar to like a Morse code kind of thing?
Well, no, actually, this was just an alert.
This was just an alert.
So the bell went ding, 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 ding. 4 times. They had something really urgent, a bulletin.
Okay.
And so as it happened, I heard ding, 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 ding. Walked over to the Associated Press printer, and there was a message saying there were reports of shots fired along the Kennedy motorcade route in Dallas this morning, which I thought, that doesn't sound good. And that was followed rapidly by more details until suddenly it was obvious what was going on. I grabbed the telephone and called Jensen's restaurant, and there was a waitress named Rita up there that everybody knew. She happened to answer the phone and said, "Rita, tell everybody from the Journal to get their ass down to the newspaper because
get your butt back." Yeah.
So we had, and we managed to turn out pretty good cover. The paper would have gone to press by then. We didn't get it run out and say, "Hell, stop the presses," because it wasn't quite that late. But they managed to hold the press time so that we could develop the story pretty well. We did a bunch of interviews locally with, the mayor and so forth, what kind of reaction things, plus all of the wire stories. So I was, I guess say not proud, but impressed to be the fact that I was.
You were on it.
I was the first one on it.
Yeah. Because if, you would have, if you weren't dedicated to your job and you just heard the what do they call that?
A teletype.
A teletype. If you would have heard that go off and you're just like, whatever. I'll just let it go. But you didn't. Yeah, you jumped right on.
That's what you do when you're in that business,
right? Well, but there's people that are lazy about it, and there's people, especially with you being a younger in the business.
Young and eager. Yeah, that's right.
So it just goes to show what type of person you are, dedicated to getting the proper news or the proper information out there in a quickly manner and proper, correct manner too, obviously. But that's incredible.
Interesting, too, another teletype story. My first newspaper job, which was the Chicago Daily Calumet, which was a small South Side paper. We ran like 8 pages a day.
So it was out of Calumet City, I imagine?
No, actually out of the Calumet neighborhood,
the Calumet
90th
neighborhood.
in Baltimore, near the steel mills.
Okay.
And we had a staff of 4 people, and we turned out a lot of copy. But for many years, I carried in my wallet a little slip of teletype paper that I had cut off. And this happened in 1960, and it was bulletin, "Nixon concedes." Right at the Kennedy and Nixon. So I just thought that was kind of a cool thing. So I carried it around for many years until it finally disintegrated.
Did I? Yeah, I was going to say, because that paper.
Yeah, it's just a kind of rough paper.
Yeah, but, it's nothing special. Because a lot of times it would just get thrown away after,
That's right.
Because you would get that information from the teletype,
right,
and then you would just type it on your own paper, right?
Yeah. Well, actually, the teletype material was usually given directly if there was an editor would look at it, and write a headline to go with it and so forth, and then it was sent to our teletype or our linotype operators in the back shop.
Okay.
And the type was set. Now, of course, stories that were written by the reporters were typed out, and then would go to the linotype.
Then they'd go to linotype. Okay.
But I also worked in television for a while.
Yeah. I remember you mentioning that.
In let's see, 1963. Yeah, I was married in Milwaukee. My wife, who had met at college, and then I went off to work and she ended up actually graduating from Marquette Journalism School in 1961. And she got a job working for a television station in Milwaukee, doing promotional work. And after we got married, I quit my job. Because, for one thing, this was the Korean War period. Or not a Korean War, I'm sorry, Vietnam.
No, that would have been Vietnam, yeah.
Yeah, I had the draft breathing down my neck. So I thought, okay, I'm not going to worry about, getting a job until my situation clears up here. Well, as it turned out, I never did get drafted, as it turned out. But
I'd say you got pretty lucky.
Yes. Well, as it happened at that time, if you were an impending parent, you were he would not be drafted.
So you were expecting.
Our oldest son was kept me out of the draft.
Oh, thank God.
But eventually, once, shortly after we were married, we were married in May, and June, July, August was, of course, vacation season. So the television station people were in the news department were going on vacation. So news director called me up one day and said, "You want to come and do a fill-in and do some work, cover for the people on?" I said, "Yeah, why not? I'll make my money. I don't care."
So you were actually reporting?
I was writing news.
You were writing, okay.
We had a show called Wisconsin News Morning Edition, which was sort of a localized GMA, Good Morning America kind of thing. We had, an anchor and newsman and that sort of thing. And so I would get up and get into the station at like 4:30 in the morning. Riding a bus in Milwaukee in January or any time in the wintertime is not fun. But anyway, I'd go and essentially open up the newsroom, get the first newscasts together and that sort of thing. Our newsman was a young bachelor who liked to party. Mm-hmm. So one of my duties was to call him up every morning and keep the phone ringing until he actually rolled out of bed and was on his way.
Did you ever have to go acquire him?
No, he always turned up.
Okay.
He was very conscientious, and he was an incredible sight reader. I would often be standing by the studio door with the copy for the newscast in my hand. He would fly in the door over behind the lectern, drop the paper down, look up, and the red light went on in the camera, and he would start delivering the news.
Man.
He was very professional, and he ended up doing very well in his profession. His name was Bill Plant. And beginning with the Reagan, one of the things he covered was the spec murders in Chicago, the guy who killed the nurses. And
okay,
so forth.
I was going to say that was the nurses, right?
But he later went on to cover politics, and beginning with the Reagan administration, he was the CBS White House correspondent for about 12 or 15 years.
That's huge.
I think he went through the last of the Bushes or something like that, but he was a terrific reporter. So that was another phase of
Yeah, there's so many. It's like you've done so many things. It's hard to. I know we're all over the place with as far as the timeline goes, but going back to the very beginning of your life, south side of Chicago. Mm-hmm. What did your parents do for a living? Where were they from? Were they from the Chicago area as well, or where did your family? Obviously, you mentioned earlier about your grandfather having that Irish heritage. Mm-hmm. I would imagine Klasey, is that Irish as well?
No, it's Swiss.
It's Swiss, okay.
Mm-hmm. The original spelling was Klaesi, and there's a story to that, too.
Okay, I would love to hear that one, too.
My father, at one point, when he was, I guess he was over 18, I guess, at the time, but he and his father had a kind of contentious relationship at times. And at one point, he got really mad at his father, and he went down to the courthouse and changed his name, the spelling of the name, from Klaesi to Klasey, because his favorite uncle had done that at some point.
Oh, okay.
So that's how we ended up. I still have, I guess we don't have any male cousins who still have that name. One of my female cousins lives in Manteno, and her side of the family had always spelled it Klaesi. But anyway, my dad originally was a bread truck driver for Continental Baking, for Continental Baking, Wonder Bread. He and his mother for a time ran a small grocery store, but then eventually he became a Chicago firefighter.
Oh, wow.
And did that for many years. By the time that he retired, he was a lieutenant on the fire department and was in charge of inspections and training for all of the nursing homes and hospitals on the south side of Chicago.
So when did he enter the Chicago Fire Department? Were that 40s, 50s?
Let's see, I'm trying to think back here. It would be, I was born in 1939. I think it was after the war, because he was in the Navy briefly toward the end of the war, and then they discharged everybody. And I think right after that, he took the exam and went into the fire department.
I was going to say, I was curious to hear how the fire department worked. How did you get your way into the fire department back then?
You took an examination, just as you do today. There's a written exam and a physical exams, just like police officers do. And then there is an eligibility list, and the next time that the fire department needs to add some people, they call people off the eligibility list and hire them.
Were there ever times where you thought your dad wasn't going to come home?
It was, you sort of always had that feeling. My mother, people would say to my mother, how can you handle that with your husband is sort of on the possibility of something happening all the time? She said, that's fate. You live with it. You just have the faith that they're going to come home. He was only injured in the line of duty once that I know of, and it was when he had a chimney fall on his head.
Oh, my gosh. and it was probably because of a fire. Was he down below on the street? Or?
Yeah, he was actually, I think he may have been on the roof ventilating, and they had a fairly tall brick chimney, and it went over and knocked him out, gave him a minor concussion. He didn't get too seriously injured, thank goodness. But we had... public service, in a way, runs in our family. My sister is a retired Chicago police officer.
Okay.
And she worked for the Chicago police officer for many years as a street cop, and then also in kind of the youth division.
You could probably write a book on her stories, I bet, if you haven't already.
Interesting ones.
Or maybe she's written a book herself.
Yeah. No, she hasn't, but she's a very interesting person.
Yeah.
And it's gone on through, it skipped a generation.
Okay.
My grandson is a Kankakee police officer. In fact, he's an investigator for the Kankakee Police Department.
Is that your grandson, you said?
My grandson.
Because I recently learned isn't there a Jack Klasey Jr. or second?
Not Junior. No, Jack. That's Jack is the police officer.
Okay.
And no, his father's Kevin, who's my second oldest son.
Okay.
But we didn't have any Jacks in it. My oldest son is John, but was never known as Jack.
Okay.
Whereas Jack is my grandson's given name.
Okay. But he's not like the second or the...
No.
Well, I guess he couldn't be the second because he's your grandson.
Yeah, there's a skip in between.
Yeah.
My grandfather, my father, and I were all John, known as Jack, but we never did any of the 1, 2, 3 things. We all had different middle names.
Okay. So your first name is actually John?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
So
I use that for signing, checks and bills and things like that.
So is Jack your middle name, or is Jack is
it's a nickname.
That's just the John? I guess I never understood how the John and Jack thing became a thing.
It goes back a long way. I think it's a traditional nickname for John. Just like, for example, Bill is a nickname for William.
Yeah.
But although not as obvious.
Yeah, but John and Jack, they're both 4 letters.
Yep.
So
I think it came out of England somewhere. I don't know why, but it seems to me that I read somewhere once that the substitution or the use of Jack as a nickname for John had its being there.
Right.
Yeah, so anyway, I cause confusion all the time.
Right. So it's neat, though, that your grandson, Jack, is continuing that public service.
Family tradition.
Yeah.
Sort of, yes. Mm-hmm.
And I always felt, in a way, and obviously a different way, media is almost can be like a public service, especially if you're working for a newspaper like
That's
you
right.
have, or
radio news,
things like that. And so it seems like it always kind of continued in your family in one shape or another. So yeah, growing up, on the south side you said the Jackson Park.
Yeah, actually
area.
South of Jackson Park. We were about 95th Street, and Jackson Park is about 59th, 60th Street, directly north of where we lived.
Mm-hmm.
As kids, you could ride the bus for 10 cents, and a lot of Saturdays we'd just jump on the bus, go right down Jeffrey Street to Museum of Science and Industry, for example, which, of course, was a legacy of the Columbian Exposition.
Yeah. And is that where your fascination with the George Ferris and the Ferris wheel came into play?
In a way. I've always been a Chicago history nut.
Of course. You lived in Chicago.
Yeah, and I'm particularly interested kind of in the Columbian Exposition and things that took place on the South Side. And the actual genesis of The Prince of Wheelwrights, which is the title of the Ferris wheel book, came in a conversation with my wife. We were just sitting casually, I don't think, somewhere talking about something, and somehow the Columbian Exposition came up, and I talked about this really kind of neat thing, the Ferris wheel, and she said, one of my high school friends, her parents have the plans for the Ferris wheel in their attic. I said, oh, let me know more about that. And so she told me, and this was she grew up in Rock Island, Illinois.
Okay.
And her friend's family was apparently distantly related to George Ferris. So I said, let me get in touch with them. I'm going to see if they would let me take a look at those things. Well, as it turned out, it was not the plans for the Ferris wheel, but one of the promotional photographic booklets. There's like a 24-page book with all kinds of neat pictures of the Ferris wheel and the view from the Ferris wheel, which was, of course, 250 feet up in the air and that sort of thing. So that got me started.
Okay. So when was that promotional book printed? Was it printed during the Columbian Exposition, or was this after the fact?
No, it was actually printed in 1893, and in fact was actually sold by the Ferris wheel company as a souvenir.
Okay.
There were a number of things. There were a lot of pictorial books done at the time of the fair and after the fair about the fair, and they've covered all the interesting things like the Ferris wheel and the different midway attractions and the main grounds themselves with these huge white buildings and so forth.
And I know it was after the Columbian Exposition in Chicago in the late 1800s there. Mm-hmm. The Ferris wheel actually toured the country or toured the world, right? Or is that incorrect? I can't remember exactly.
No, actually, the Ferris wheel only ran for 4 months in the Columbian Exposition. It closed at the end of October 1893, and the fairgrounds were demolished. Part of them were burned down, but the rest of them were demolished. The Ferris wheel was dismantled and stored on a whole string of flat cars on a railroad siding south of 59th Street. They stood there for about, I guess 2 years, I think, and then the Ferris wheel company leased some property at Wrightwood Avenue and Clark Street in Chicago up on the north side. And we're going to build the Ferris wheel and do something called Ferris Wheel Park, which sounded like kind of a neat idea. And it was, but unfortunately the neighbors, especially to the east of there, which was a pretty fancy area between there and what park? Can't think of the name.
So what area would that be now? Lincoln?
Lincoln Park, right.
Okay.
Just directly east or west of Lincoln Park.
Yeah.
And neighbors, there are 2 or 3 streets between that space and Lincoln Park, and it was a pretty fancy neighborhood. Going the other way, the west was mostly working class people, but the people on the other side were unhappy about this. They didn't want this, more or less, not in my backyard, sort of thing. So there were all kinds of lawsuits and so forth, and one of the most effective part was they couldn't stop it from being built, but they could stop it from getting a liquor license for the restaurant and so forth.
Of course.
Which was, the wheel was built, went into operation by the end of 1895, only for a couple weeks because winter came in. But then from there until 1903, it sort of limped along. It was in bankruptcy a good part of the time because most of the people who wanted to ride it had already ridden on it. And
during the fair?
During the fair,
okay.
Mostly, as far as local people. In the fair, they had they carried more than 1 million people in the 4 months, but
wow.
Most of those were out-of-town visitors.
Right.
Anyway, the wheel kind of limped along. They added vaudeville attractions and various other things just to keep it going. And it was finally in bankruptcy, and in 1903, it was auctioned off for scrap. But it wasn't scrapped.
Okay.
The company that won the auction was the Chicago House Wrecking Company, which was a huge operation that did the salvaging of things like the Columbian Expedition, all the wire and the fixtures and that sort of thing. They bought it and they decided we could put this together, take it down and put it together again in St. Louis in 1904 because there's a World's Fair down there in 1904. So they did. They dismantled it, put it back on the railroad train, and took it down to
And that's
St.
where
Louis.
George Ferris was from, right? Wasn't he from Missouri?
No, he was born in Galesburg, Illinois.
Oh, for some reason I thought he was from the St. Louis area.
No, he was born in Galesburg and grew up in Nevada, near Reno. And then went to school at the Rensselaer Polytechnic Institute in upstate New York, which at that time was the best engineering school in the country. And he was not just a fly-by-night guy who thought of a Ferris wheel. He was a very prominent engineer. He owned a company that did the testing of iron and steel for all of the many of the major projects in the country.
Like bridges and things like that?
Bridges and the elevated structures and the various buildings in Chicago and New York and all over the place. So he's a very prominent engineer. He was only in his 30s at the time that he designed the wheel.
Okay, so this was just like the next leap for him, really. He already had a good name.
All right, and a good career. This is actually kind of a little bit of a sideline for him in a way. And actually, he lost money on the wheel.
Yeah.
The wheel made money, and the stockholders, the corporation, made money on it from the fair. Unfortunately, Ferris had set up a company to do the actual construction of the wheel
in Chicago.
And the excuse me, the price, they had a fixed price contract to build the wheel, and it went way over, and so he ended up with a big pile of debt. And that carried through the rest of his life. And there was a lot of things going on. As it happened, he died at the age of 37 of typhoid fever.
That would have been the teens or the 20s?
I'm trying to think how
maybe? Well, maybe earlier than that.
I believe 1897, I think it was. I'd have to look it up and see. I'm a little vague on the year, but it was not long after. It was after the fair, and after the Ferris wheel company thing, but before the before the 1904 exposition in St. Louis. Anyway, in St. It was again fairly successful. Chicago House Wrecking Company set it up and called it the observation wheel at that point. And they had a lot of interesting stunts to draw people into it. There were gymnasts that did demonstrations on top of some of the cars as it was going around.
Oh my gosh. Kind of like a circus almost, right?
There were a couple of performers from a Wild West show that was playing as part of the 1904 affair that got married on the Ferris wheel on their horses.
Wow.
In one of the cars.
Oh, that's so cool.
These cars were not what you think of in terms of Ferris wheel, now, something with...
Well, I know in this picture, they're huge.
They were about the size of a trolley car or a big bus.
And were they like that? I know they were like that for the Chicago Columbian Exposition, but were they like that in the 1900 fair or 1904?
This is exactly the same wheel.
It was.
Take it down and put up again.
Okay.
Yeah, they would hold 40 people in chairs, and they could add another 20 standees in the same car.
Yeah, that's a lot.
It was huge. I always think of them in terms of being about the size of a trolley car.
Yeah. Yeah,
but
I'd say it looks pretty accurate looking at the front cover of the Prince of Wheelwright's book.
Yes.
So where can people buy this? I know you had mentioned Amazon before.
It's on Amazon, yes, and in fact, actually, it's published on the Amazon platform. So the softcover book is available through Amazon, and it's also in a Kindle ebook version.
Okay.
Locally, it's stocked at the Kankakee County Museum's bookstore.
That's where everyone should go. Forget about Amazon. Right. Go to the museum and get it.
And help support the museum.
Yeah, exactly.
But, the Ferris wheel itself had a sad end, actually. It was dynamited.
It was dynamite. Was that another stunt? I suppose.
No, it was the cheapest way to bring it down and cut it up for scrap.
So did the dynamite happen in St. Louis, or
In
where
St. Louis, yeah, it was in Forest Park in St. Louis. After the fair, the Chicago House Wrecking Company was also won the contract to salvage all the material from the fair, so they were busy for a year or so taking down all these buildings and just left the Ferris wheel standing without the cars and so forth. But then they decided it was time to take it down, and they could have dismantled it as they had before to use it again, but they decided it had kind of run its course, so they packed dynamite around the supports on one side of the wheel and set it off, and the whole thing just crumpled down into a big mess.
Oh my
and it was cut
gosh.
up for scraps.
I suppose they did that. You said something about cost too. Maybe labor was cheaper because you weren't paying a bunch of men to
very skilled people to do it.
Yeah, you weren't paying them to undo bolts and things like rivets and all that. Because I can only imagine how much time that would take to undo every little piece that's fastened.
Oh yeah, they were
together.
all fastened with bolts and so forth, so they could take them apart. Or pin connections of one kind or other.
And this is before the days of a traveling carnival. So,
Well, the traveling carnivals use a small version of the Ferris wheel that was developed by an Illinois man. The Eli Bridge Company in Jacksonville, Illinois, built only one bridge in its life. A man named William Sullivan, no relation to my grandfather.
Okay, I was going to say, is there a relation?
William Sullivan was a mechanic in Root House, Illinois, which is right near Jacksonville. And he went to the fair and just, ate this up. I think he wrote it a couple times, and he was able to talk the engineers into letting him look at all the mechanisms and so forth. And he said, I think I can build one of these smaller size that's portable. There were some smaller wheels around. They were mostly made of wood, and they about 40 feet high, but they were not very portable. They were not constructed to be taken apart and put together again readily.
Okay.
So William Sullivan developed I think it was about 60-foot diameter wheel, and his crew could, take it apart and put it back together again fairly rapidly, a couple hours, I think. And he began traveling around Illinois and Indiana with this portable Ferris wheel. And after a while, other people saying, "Hey, can you make one of these for us?" And so it became he became a manufacturer of Ferris wheels. The Eli Bridge Company name was put on it because some of his backers said, "This is kind of a fad, probably. You better make chance to do bridges or something else that'll continue to make money when this fad passes away." Well, it never did. They did build one little 9-foot bridge across a drainage ditch or something in that area, but the rest of the time they had built Ferris wheels.
That's funny.
And interestingly enough, they managed to track down the original wheel, which had been sold to somebody at some point, and that now stands out in front of their factory in Jacksonville. It's an interesting story.
That is very fascinating. Did Sullivan have to purchase any kind of, I don't know if patents or copyrights existed back then. Did he have to purchase that from someone before he could start mass producing?
No. Copyrights and patents did exist at that time. In fact, they go all the way back to the beginning of the country.
That's what I thought.
But George Ferris never applied for any patents.
Why? I can't believe that.
He said so. He said it's mostly an application of general principles, and he said we thought of applying for patents on some of the features of it, but really decided that it was nothing really that new. It just was a combination of existing materials. The best material on George Ferris was one of my great discoveries. In researching the book, I literally read on microfilm every day's edition of the Chicago Tribune from 1891 until about 1902 or 1903. And one day I happened to notice, in that time they used to run the court calendars. What what cases were coming before judges in the various courts.
Okay.
On the front page, and I happened to catch a note saying, let's see, Chicago Observation Wheel Company, I think, versus Ferris Wheel Company, patent infringement. I thought, oh, patent infringement suit. Okay. So I was able to find that there's a records depository in Chicago, Federal Records Depository out near Midway Airport. And I was able to actually go in and look at the court record on the patent infringement suit, which is 400 pages of typed material in this big box.
So I imagine you didn't read that whole thing.
Oh, I did.
Oh, you did?
And
all 400 pages?
And I had them copy a number of the pages, too, that I needed for... But
so what did you find in that 400 pages?
I found in that 400 pages probably 120 pages of actual interviews with George Ferris about how he built the wheel, how the idea came about, and his reaction to various things, and a lot of other material related, because this was not a courtroom trial, but it was depositions and then cross-examination by the different attorneys. And as it happened, the Ferris Wheel Company, the suit was dismissed as frivolous, and the other company was was told to pay the cost, $26 or whatever it was for
to Ferris.
To pay the cost to the court.
Oh, to pay the cost to the court.
Yes.
Okay.
So anyway, that was interesting. The archivist at the Chicago Records Center told me that, as far as he could tell from the records, I was the first person to open that box since it had been stored away in the 1890s.
That's unbelievable. You would have thought someone else would have opened it.
Yeah, there was
then.
A professor out now retired out in Maryland, who wrote a very good book. It was a pictorial history of Ferris wheels in general.
Okay.
And he and I corresponded on and off for many years. We'd send material back and forth to each other, and it was interesting. I sent him some copies of some of the material that I had on the Ferris thing, and he said he was just delighted because he had never heard of that happening.
Yeah. Well, it's probably maybe it was never opened because they found out it was 400 pages long. And since you're a very dedicated person, and maybe others that came across it were like, I think I'll pass.
No, that's the kind of things that historical researchers go berserk about, though. We love stuff like that.
It's true. It's very true. So no wonder why. I mean, that's just one piece of the many different puzzles and pieces of research that you came across to compile this book.
Yeah, I have a file cabinet, one of those horizontal drawer file cabinets. One entire drawer of that is research materials, mostly photocopies and notes and so forth.
Mm-hmm. Wow. So yeah, everyone needs to get buy a copy of the Prince of Wheelwrights, and Jack was kind enough to leave a copy here with me, so I can't wait to read that.
In your spare time.
I'm definitely gonna dive into that.
I don't think you have any spare time.
I've been trying to get into that habit though of reading every night before I go to bed. I always read to my son, of course.
Right.
But I'm trying to actually read to myself though too, when I can. So there's some nights I'm able to get in that routine, and some nights I'm not. But I'm slowly getting better at it.
Congratulations! I read at least 2 hours every night.
Yeah, see, and that's what I need to make it at least like 30 minutes. Yeah. If I can, make that happen every day, then I think I'll be good.
I have the advantage, of course, being retired, of being able to sit up late and get up late in the morning if I need to. So
yeah, that's nice. That must be nice. But I want to get back to, so what brought you to Kankakee County? Was it the Daily Journal, or did you have family here or any other connections here? Or was it really that you just saw a job listing for the Journal? How did that?
Okay, it was kind of a intermittent sort of thing. I was working for the television station in Milwaukee, and really got tired of writing little short paragraph news stories. I said, I've got to get back to newspapers again. Mm-hmm. Well, somehow I took a job in Elgin, Illinois, running as the sole reporter / editor for a group of weekly newspapers up around Carpentersville and that area. After about a week and a half, I thought, this is a really bad fit. I did not like working for the guy that owned it. He was a self-made man who had botched the job. He just was really difficult to work for. So I started looking for, and at that time there was a magazine called Editor and Publisher, which was was all about newspapers, of course, articles on various things, but also it had a terrific job listing section.
Like classifieds.
Yeah, classifieds. Yeah. And so I saw an advertisement for the Kankakee Daily Journal, and I thought, well, it's kind of interesting. It seems to fit my background and so forth. And I happened to talk to an uncle of mine who lived in Joliet, who was a salesman for Arrow Shirt Company, and we're talking, and I know he knew a lot about the area. And so, what do you know about Kankakee? He says, he said, it's a great town. He said, I go down there to, sell shirts to Plant Carter Company and so forth, and Alden's. And he said, I've always thought it was really a pleasant town. You ought to look it up. So I went down and was interviewed by Len and Burl Small, the two brothers who were, at that time, owned the operation. And they offered me $125 a week to start, which sounded good to me because my first newspaper job, I made $50 a week. So
yeah, that's a pretty big improvement.
And
there.
I was told at the time that was the highest weekly offer they had ever made for a reporter just starting for them.
Wow.
Which nice. It was very flattering.
Yeah.
And it was also very nice because I had, I think, two kids. No, I had only one kid at that time.
Yeah, because this was 1963.
63, right.
That you came. Yeah.
We came here.
And I mean, if you think about it, right, is that considered like the heyday for newspapers, or what's considered, is that during that era?
Oh, that's definitely part of the highlight periods of newspapers. From after the war, I think, is probably it. I mean, I'm constantly reading old newspapers, and I'm amazed at the number of ads and the number of pages of, you had a Sunday newspaper that was like 90 pages sometimes,
wow.
For example.
Yeah, that's
96 pages. And even the skinniest edition was probably 30 pages. So.
Yeah, and that's quite a bit.
Yeah, right now you won't find the biggest one being 32 pages, except maybe an occasional Sunday. But it was, we had a large newsroom. We had, I think, probably with, secretarial help and photographers and so forth, I think we had like 50-some people in the newsroom there. And it was a great place to come to work because they took journalism seriously, and they still do.
Yes. Yeah.
Unfortunately, they're down to about 7 or 8 people in the newsroom right now, and they're struggling, but I think they're doing a good job.
Yeah, and also, I mean, they don't have the press room anymore either.
No, that's right.
And that's just so they can keep operating. It's cheaper to have someone else print it for you.
That's right.
Than actually have your, So
it's economy of scale. It's somebody that's printing several newspapers. A company that's doing that can do it cheaper than running your own operation.
Yeah, and that's just the fact of the matter.
Right.
Whether you agree with it or not, like that's just the fact of the. It's just fact. So and it sounds like you were kind of on and off with the Journal over the years, right? Because you said you ended up working for that.
Imperial International Learning.
Yeah, you ended up working for them full time.
Right. Oh yes.
And then when did you end up going back to the Journal then?
Well, actually, I've never gone back to the Journal as a regular employee.
So you've just
I've
been
writing
freelance?
this column as a freelance on a freelance basis since 2016.
Okay.
Now my wife was the librarian at the Journal for 24 years. She went to work there when we had 2 kids in college, and she said she had to put her degree to work and make some money. So she stayed there for almost a quarter century. But no, my relationship with the Journal has always been a good one. Occasionally, even in between, I would write an occasional story for them if they needed some help or something. But I've enjoyed doing the column because it's something that's I love doing, and people find it interesting. In fact, I don't think of myself so much as a historian. I think of myself more as a storyteller. I like to tell stories that catch people's attention and read them. And usually one of the a couple of things that I do with columns that I think help that. Always begins with what I call a hook. There's always something kind of interesting that grabs your attention. I can't remember anything offhand now, but there's usually some kind of might tie to a story, to a song title or a line from a poem or something like that, and then you get into. And there also are things that I call nuggets, which are little interesting, odd pieces of information that you wouldn't normally expect to find in a story. So try to keep people's interest in there, and they're relatively short. I run generally about 800 words for each one, and we're fortunate because the museum has such an incredible photographic collection that I can almost always illustrate them with anywhere from 1 to 5 or 6 photographs. Usually they only use 1 or 2 because of space sort of things, but the other day, the latest edition of Lifestyles magazine, the periodic magazine that the journal runs.
Yeah.
I always write one article for them. And the current edition, the December edition, I looked back at Christmas shopping 100 years ago in Kankakee.
Oh, cool.
Which I was shocked to realize that was 1921. It wasn't 1870 or something.
Right?
That was 100 years ago.
You're thinking like, wait a minute. I know. I keep thinking back at so the 1920s were 100 years ago already.
Which is amazing.
Yeah. How in the hell is that possible?
That's right. But anyway, in there they had a little more room available. I think they used 7 or 8 pictures, all the pictures that I had sent them, old downtown shots with the brick streets and diagonal parking and so forth, and stores that are long gone, but you can read the names on the front of them and so forth. It's really fun to dig in. We have, I believe our collection at the museum currently, we have almost 15,000 photographs that are cataloged and digitized in our system so we can pull them up. There are probably at least that many.
I was going to say, there's probably that many that aren't cataloged properly yet.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we've been cataloging for about 10 years now.
Okay.
On the photo. Well, actually, the photo collection goes back much further than that, but we've been digitizing them and cataloging for about 10 years.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it takes a long time to properly research all that because you want to, if you're going to catalog it and digitize it, you don't want to have to go back and do it. So you got to make sure that whatever you're putting in that system, that it's correct.
That's right. Yeah.
So
if you have a picture of the Hotel Kankakee, you want to note that it was on the northeast corner of Merchant and Schuyler Avenue. Was built in 1927, I think it was. I don't remember offhand, but so those kinds of information, so that when somebody is going back to do the research, the information is there and it's correct.
Yes, yeah. And for whatever it may be that they're writing about or researching about or any of that. So
something I just realized we never mentioned the first book that I did.
I mean, you've done so many books. What was the first book?
It was called Of the People. It was in 1968, and I was a co-author with Mary Jean Hood, who was another reporter at the Journal. And that is the basic history of Kankakee County. It's the first really comprehensive one that was written. We were commissioned to do it by the county board. 1968 or 69 was the sesquicentennial of Illinois, I believe, 150th anniversary. And so, as they did with the bicentennial, there were a lot of things commissioned to recognize it. So the county board said, we haven't got a really comprehensive history of the county. Let's do it this way. So they hired us to do that in our spare time. And we turned out to about 400 or 500 page book, so it's pretty good sized. And a lot of writing, and a lot of writing in the evening.
Yeah, I bet, because you're working your full-time job at that time. Yeah, I mean, your kids are still young. It's 1968.
That's right. My wife, bless her, took at one point, getting down toward the end of the project when things were getting tight on a deadline. We had 3 kids at the time, and she packed them up and went for a week to visit her mother over in Rock Island with the kids so that I could just work away and work. And so I went into this crisis mode where I would write as long as my eyes could continue working, and then I'd quit and go to sleep for a while. And then when I woke up, I'd go back to it again. And in between, I'd be eating while still typing and this sort of thing.
Yeah, just like you see in the movies.
That's right. So, in fact, I just resurrected a picture the other day that I ran across that was taken in my first newspaper job with the Chicago Daily Calumet in 1960. And I was sitting at a desk with my manual typewriter in front of me with a cigarette hanging out of the corner of my mouth.
I was going to say, were you a smoker? 'Cause if you added the cigarette into the picture, that would just complete the stereotype of a writer.
Yeah, and the place was, there were file cabinets in the background and the police loudspeaker next to my desk and that sort of thing, and a really antique-looking television set over in the corner.
Oh, cool!
Yeah, it's a neat picture.
I would love to see. You'll have to send that to me.
I will.
I would love to. We might. I might end up using that for this podcast. That'd be a great picture. So, in all of your years of research from the 1960s to now of Kankakee County, what? Between the books you've written or the columns you've written in the Daily Journal, what are some of your favorite stories or some of your just favorite pieces of information that you've come across in all this time? I mean, I know that's many years, but there has to be something that sticks out in your mind all the time when you think, wow, like I never would have thought I would find this.
I try to find things, in fact, that other people have not written about in the past, right? Because there have been going back to almost 1900, there have been history columns in the Journal or its predecessors, Bert Burroughs originally, Harold Simmons, Dick Johnson. But that entire spectrum, somebody has been writing history columns. And, predictably, everybody writes about the courthouse or about Maternity Church or about Noah Levasseur. And I write about them, too. But I try to find kind of the unusual things. For example, the day that the first Walgreens store in Kankakee opened, and it was a Christmas period, I think in the 1930s, if I don't remember the date exactly. One of the store officials was murdered in a holdup in the store. And it got to be they ended up, it was a search all over the state, and they finally ended up capturing the robbery gang and so forth, but that was unusual. And then there's a man named Anderson who was from Chabance, who made his living as a balloonist. This is back in the 1890s. He would go kind of barnstorming around the state, going to fairs and so forth.
Yeah.
And he would go up in his balloon, hot air balloon, and then parachute back down to the earth again.
Okay. When you said balloonist, I wasn't sure if you meant like a hot air balloon or like one of those people that makes balloon animals.
Like people in Mason's novelties.
Yeah, I wasn't sure which one you meant. So this guy was a hot air balloonist. Mm-hmm. And why did he say why he robbed?
Oh, no, this was totally unrelated to the robberies. I'm sorry. I jumped from one project to another.
Okay. So that was unusual. And then you're talking about this guy from Chabance was a balloonist.
A balloonist, right.
Hot air balloonist.
Yeah, and he and his wife ran a small hotel in Chabance, I think. But he made his mark as a balloon ascensionist.
Okay. I see. Yeah, that's something cool I never would have guessed either.
And let's see, the story of the first woman attorney in Kankakee, who was a graduate of the Kankakee Business College also. Kankakee had, originally it was Brown's Business College, and then Mary Gallagher, who worked for Brown's and one of their they were kind of a chain, came here as the manager of the Kankakee, went over in the arcade building, and eventually she bought the operation. And a lot of Brown's and Gallagher's, they turned out a lot of court reporters, secretaries, accountants, and this sort of thing.
Stereotypical jobs for women at that time.
Yeah, women and men to some extent.
Okay.
But anyway, then Mary Gallagher operation reached the point where she needed more space, and she thought she wanted to have her own building. So she built a 2-story building on Indiana Avenue, midway down the hill from between Court Street and Merchant. It's still there, in fact.
Oh, okay.
As the Gallagher School of Business. The upper floor was the school, and the lower floor she rented out to a car dealer. I believe it was at one point anyway. But many, many, many people in Kankakee graduated from Gallagher, including, I believe, Governor Samuel Shapiro did that before he went into the law field.
Really? I didn't know that existed.
Gallagher College of Business.
College of Business.
Actually, it was up to the 1940s, and then I think they went out of business. But Romy Hamas, who was a big car dealer and entrepreneur in Kankakee, opened his own college of business, Marycrest College. Built a building over, in fact, it still exists over on St. Joseph Avenue. I think one of the government agencies, Housing Authority or somebody, is that building now. But so there's been through the years many.
Is that Hamas related to the Hamases of like People's Bank?
Yes, in fact, Jeff is Romy's grandson.
Oh, okay.
His son Jerry lives in South Bend, where they had a lot of operations and so forth. As Jeff's father.
Okay.
Oh, yeah, he was another interesting person to write about, Romy Hamas.
I bet. I know that the Hamas, they've done a lot of different things in the county.
Oh, yeah.
In the area, and it sounds like beyond.
And around the world.
Yeah.
They've supported missions in Southeast Asia. They've built hotels and subdivisions in Las Vegas, and just very interesting.
That is fascinating.
And let's see, what are some of the other odds and ends?
There's so many. There's so many.
Yeah, I think I'm somewhere over 200 columns so far, so it's a little hard to keep track sometimes.
Yeah.
Did I write about this before?
Right. You're like, I can't remember. Yeah. But talk, like even just going back to the arcade building,
yes.
Is that the only building that's left that Emery Cobb constructed? Are all the other buildings that he erected demolished? Is that the only one? And the arcade building, of course, is the Clock Tower Center today. Mm-hmm. Not to confuse, because some people know it as Clock Tower.
Right. Cobb was the developer of the original building, but that's not the original building.
But I always thought the one that stood today was the original building. It was just modified.
Yeah, I thought that for quite a long time until I finally ran across what actually happened. The building itself originally was built in the 1870s or 80s. I can't remember exactly offhand right now, and it was on the corner of Merchant and Schuyler on the northwest corner. The front section was the arcade building with shops and bank and office and so forth. And the back half of the building was the Arcade Opera House.
Right.
Which lasted for quite a while, but that after Cobb died, his sons owned the property, and in 1911, 1912, they tore down the theater, the opera house section of the building, and built what's there currently right now, which are two, 5-story, I think, connected office buildings, and they're connected at the front to the arcade. But in the 1920s, a local entrepreneur, real estate, and developer named Harry Topping bought the building, and he decided to tear down the original arcade because it was only like 2 stories high and was kind of outdated, and built the current building.
Okay.
Well, keeping the name the arcade building. So.
Okay. I didn't realize that. For this whole time, I thought it was the same building, that it was just modified.
I had thought that for quite a while until I ran across the story on Harry Topping, demolishing and rebuilding it.
Okay. Which makes sense, because if you look at the original picture and you look at the picture now, I mean, you see the similarity. You can see the relation, but obviously the original building is very Gothic.
Oh, yes.
Looking.
Very rough stone.
Yeah. And obviously the building today is much more square. Right.
The original feature that it kept, of course, was the arcade through the center of the building and opening into shops.
Yeah, it did keep that. Yeah. Okay.
And another interesting building that, again, is no longer with us. I just finished writing about it. It's going to be a story that'll probably run in the end of the month, was the Fenouil's European Hotel, which was on East Avenue. It's now a parking lot, of course, but it was halfway up the block between Station Street and Merchant, obviously on the east side, because the west side was the railroad. That was in the heyday in the 1880s, when East Avenue was the main street of Kankakee. It was the main business street of Kankakee. Very fancy hotel. It was 3 stories tall. It was built by James Lilly, who was the contractor that built the state hospital.
Okay. The Kankakee State Hospital?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And he had hired an architectural firm in Chicago to design it, and I've forgotten the name. I think it was Hewitt and somebody other. Pretty well known. They had designed a very large building on North State Parkway that was the home for the Archbishop of Chicago's Catholic Diocese. And that building is still in existence, although the cardinal currently doesn't live there. He said there's just too much building, but that building is still existing. But anyway, they were hired to design this hotel and it became the most ornate and fancy hotel in Kankakee at the time. First floor was rough stone with big plate glass windows, and there was a 100-seat dining room and so forth in the hotel. Then the upper 2 floors were guest rooms. And a man named Louis Fenouil, who was native of Kankakee. He was born in St. Anne. He and his wife were the hotel operators. They didn't own the building, but they leased it and ran the operation from, 1886 until, I think, about 1893. In 1891, they expanded the hotel by cutting through the walls on either side. There were 2-story commercial buildings on either side, and they leased the top floors of those 2 buildings and added 15 more guest rooms.
Oh, wow. Do you think they did that because of the Columbian Exposition?
Somewhat, although...
because I know there was talk of how there wasn't enough like hotels and things like that in Chicago and in the surrounding areas, where there was always talk that a lot of them would stay southward, like maybe Kankakee, and then go up to the...
They could have on the railroad at that time, because there were frequent trains, but I think the majority of the Columbian Exposition overflow was probably into just the south suburbs, not coming down as far because of the hour-long trip to Chicago.
Right.
But East Avenue was very busy at that time. Commercial travelers, and of course, this was half a block from the station.
Yeah.
At that time, the station was on Station Street.
That's right.
1898. But there was also another hotel right at the corner of Station and East Avenue called the Commercial Hotel. That was like a 3-story building. But anyway, Fenouil's European Hotel was very well finished, just a classy hotel, and it remained that way for a number of years. But then gradually into the 1900s, the center of the city's commercial life shifted to Court and basically to Schuyler. And so East Avenue became kind of a backwater, and it deteriorated. By the 60s, when I came to town, it was, taverns, empty buildings, and flop houses, basically.
Yeah, yeah.
And February 24th, 1964, the hotel caught fire. By that time, it was called the Alamo Hotel. And it was essentially, single-room occupancy, transients, that sort of thing, and burned down, leaving only the walls. Nobody was... At first, they were afraid that some people had been killed in it, but they later tracked down that nobody had even been injured. But it was a very serious fire.
So that was pretty much the end of the building.
It was pretty much the end of the building, and it also, I think, was the catalyst that changed the face of Kankakee County, of Kankakee. An organization called Kankakee Development Corporation was formed by local business people, hired in a fellow from California who was a consultant, and they decided that the best way to kind of revive downtown Kankakee was to tear down all these buildings from between Court and Station Street and turn the space into parking lots to bolster the buildings on Schuyler. Well, they tore down the buildings, and I guess it helped a little bit, but eventually things being as they were, they didn't really hold off the assault of the shopping centers that much.
Yeah. They thought it would help.
That's right.
Sounds like, but
so
okay.
Sometimes I like
Interesting.
doing what I call a biography of a building, like
that's fascinating.
the building that's now, I think it's now Valspar out right across from Mountain Grove Cemetery.
Yeah.
That basic building there goes back to the 1870s or 80s, I believe, and it's held all kinds of things, including piano factory.
Yep, I was going to say that's probably the most famous thing that was there, right?
And a company, Sheldon Novelty, which made art products like easels and that sort of thing. And then eventually it became a chemical manufacturer or a coatings manufacturer and a paint factory and so forth.
Okay.
Yeah, that was one that I really enjoyed digging into because there were so many different things that happened around
So
that
many
area.
different businesses and man, I know we could go on for 5 hours easily.
Yes.
Just on those Kankakee stories alone, not all the other information that's inside your brain.
My wife calls that my mental Rolodex.
Yeah, yep. It's your mental Rolodex for sure. Jack Klasey, it's been such a pleasure. Thank you so much for everything, coming on, talking about more about your life. And I'm sure you'll be coming back for, episodes to come with the Kankakee County Museum. But I thought it would be fascinating to hear just more about you and more background on you and where you come from. So you're a Kankakee County treasure for sure. So
I think I'd rather be the Kankakee County treasurer and have some money.
Well, maybe we can arrange that. Speaking of
Nick
money, though,
Africano might be very unhappy with that.
yeah, Nick might not like that, but you can help Jack's wallet by buying the Prince of Wheelwright's book about George Ferris and the Great Wheel. Or you've obviously got plenty of other books as well. And I know a lot of them are for sale at the Kankakee County Museum gift shop.
Yes, there are a lot of relatively small books and booklets on different aspects of Kankakee County history. Oh, and by the way, I make no profit on that book at the museum.
Oh, really? Okay. You just go.
They get them at cost for me. So
that's very kind. So that's good to know. Yeah, anything else before we close out, Jack?
I don't think so, except to say thank you for putting up with me. I'm sure I've run on far longer than anybody expected. But
No. Like I said, this could go on forever. There's so many different subjects. I love learning all these new things from you. So thank you for what you do for the history and the storytelling. I really appreciate that.
Well, thank you so much, and I'd be happy to come back again.
Okay, yeah, we might have to do a couple rounds just on Jack,
or at least on the history. There's so many nice neat things to talk about there.
Like I said, you'll be back for the museum, So, all right, well, that concludes this episode of Kankakee Podcast. I'm Jake LaMore. Thank you so much for listening. It really does mean the world to me. And if you could take the time to write a positive rating and review on Apple Podcasts or wherever it is that you listen to podcasts, I would truly appreciate that. You can also sign up for our mailing list at kankakeepodcast.com. Follow us on social media at Kankakee Podcast. And our theme song is by Lupe Carroll. Until next time.
People tend to stick to you.